I am a 45-year-old white male working as a professional in the construction industry. I work in high-rise office suites, wearing button-down shirts and neckties. My hard hat is white and shiny. I am not a tradesman, so I am not speaking from ignorance about office dynamics. I often hear from men, both online and in real life, that they are afraid to speak their minds at work for fear of retribution or consequences. Most of the time, this is blamed on political correctness or diversity, equity, and inclusion. However, I am honestly confused because this sentiment is common, yet I have never felt that way. It makes me wonder if I am just not perceiving the situation correctly and might be unknowingly getting myself into trouble. What kinds of things are you worried about saying that could get you in trouble? Story 1. I would assume it is something you cannot say without major repercussions that most people can relate to. Saying there is a complete lack of leadership, pointing out that a fellow employee does minimal or poor quality work, or directly telling someone their approach to a problem is not only wrong but also really unwise. Story 2. I would like to tell the leadership sometimes where they can put their ideas. At times, they have the most foolish ideas I have ever seen. It seems like they have no understanding of what we are actually doing in the field. Story 3. I have a director who consistently says he wants to be able to reach me after hours. This is not allowed by union regulations and is against my employer's policies. Yet, he brings it up in every meeting when I don't respond after hours or when I am off. The situation is that we are in a predominantly black city. I am one of 3 white employees in the entire division of about 300 people. I am the youngest project manager there, and he is an older black man who lived through segregation and was abused by white people for most of his life. Anything I say that is not agreement is taken as disrespectful and punished harshly. If I take it to the union, neither of us will be fired, but retaliation is impossible to prove. If I stand up for myself, he will make my life miserable until I quit or he retires. I have dealt with this before with a white boss, but he retired or died, so I guess I won. Right now, because he cannot write me up for not responding, I just agree and say, of course, I will do better next time, and continue not to answer. Eventually, that will not work, but for now, I am hoping he retires soon. What I want to be able to say is simply, no, I am not carrying the work phone when I am off. If you want me to be available 24/7, you either need to put me on call and pay me for it, or you need to promote me to a manager position where that is in the job description and give me a pay increase. Honestly, I do not want either of those options. I just want to hang up the work phone when I am off and have my off hours to myself. Story 4. I'm stuck in a difficult situation right now. I had to take a job quickly as I don't have any savings. They promised me a minimum of 35 hours a week, so I took the last of my money to pay the deposit and first month's rent on an apartment. I haven't seen more than 28 hours in a week, and I'm averaging 24. Rent and bills take most of my salary. I'm living frugally on what's left, but I have basically no way to save money. I have tried talking to them about it and have been looking for other work, but I'm tied into another 3 months renting this place in a remote area with no other jobs around. I'm just going to try to survive a few more months and keep asking for more hours. But I've really got myself stuck in a dead end and I don't know what to do. The things I'm scared to say are about how unfair it is that my 2 colleagues who refuse to work weekends get to take the quiet shifts while I have to work hard for every hour I get. Also, that the 2 people running the place need to stop constantly complaining about how badly their business is doing. There are many things I want to express to the people I work with and for, and the customers I deal with, but I stay quiet because I have to. If I don't, I risk becoming homeless within a few weeks. Story 5. I work at a very small company that has a storefront. At my job, the women are allowed to date the customers. One married woman had 2 separate affairs, and an engaged woman had 1. These are open information. They also talk about how handsome customers are and even discuss celebrity anatomy they've seen in movies and TV shows. On the other hand, as men, we are not allowed to do any of that. In fact, one man was written up for telling another man he was a butt guy. A female coworker overheard it, reported him, and said he was objectifying women. Another male coworker was written up for getting a customer's phone number. He was also reported by a female coworker. It is possible the women would get in trouble for their behavior as well if we reported it to human resources, but no one has done so. We just complain to each other after making sure no one else is listening. Story 6. I have an example. I worked at a place with a very performative, diversity, equity, and inclusion-obsessed human resources department. They were honestly nuts about it and tried so hard to be right, they often ended up being racist or sexist by accident. One day they sent around an all-staff email saying we all had to put pronouns in our emails. Non-optional. I was against this because if someone was questioning their gender in any way, it was not the company's role to force them to pick an identity. If the point is freedom of expression, then the expression should be free, optional, and in one's own time. I wrote a very respectful and diplomatic email bringing up this point in private to the human resources director but decided not to send it. I didn't think I would have made any friends going against an edict from human resources, even if my position was valid. Just for context, the same human resources department separated the two brown women in the whole company. They sat next to each other and were good workmates, but human resources moved one to another department entirely to spread the diversity. They once thanked a man in an all-staff email for being Samoan. I first heard about Greta Thunberg via an email from Human Resources saying we were not allowed to ridicule her. Okay, sure. I just did not want to be on the radar of that kind of crazy. Story 7. Professionalism is important, and I am usually free to speak my mind about professional topics using work-appropriate language. These caveats are very important. If you are not free to speak your mind professionally at work on work-related topics, that is a problem with the company. If you are not able to keep it professional and on task at work, that is more of your problem. Story 8. I am in management at a company large enough to have human resources retreats for management to teach us how to avoid lawsuits. Nobody can speak their mind at work, and it's not just men. Companies are desperately trying to avoid lawsuits, and it is only a matter of time before something happens. Therefore, even the most slightly offensive remarks need to be discouraged. I had a meeting with my team last week. One report made an innocuous joke about another teammate's gray hair. They have worked together for 10 years and hang out outside of work. Obviously, it was all in good fun. Even that is too much because you never know what might happen. If there is a long history of such interactions and it ends with a fallout and one person reporting the other for harassment, showing human resources all these instances of this behavior with me doing nothing, then I would be the one in trouble. You never know about personal relationships involved. So the message is always to blindly discourage any of it out of an abundance of caution. The obvious examples are sensitive topics like diversity, equity, and inclusion, but it is not just that. Even criticizing someone's behavior adds potential liability. The less everyone talks, the less chance there is of getting sued. Story 9. I used to work at a trade school. I worked in the testing facility. It was a nice job, mostly supervising to ensure students didn't cheat on exams. Occasionally, I graded papers or offered disability services. My coworker was a woman, let's call her Alex. Alex was a heavy smoker, and she got pregnant within the first few months of working there. I noticed she stopped smoking fairly quickly. About a year later, I asked another coworker, her friend, if everything was okay with Alex because she wasn't taking her usual smoke breaks. The next day, I was brought into human resources. Essentially, I got in trouble because I inadvertently revealed my coworker's pregnancy. I've since learned not to discuss personal matters about colleagues at work. I wasn't complaining as she was getting much more work done. I was just honestly concerned. Story 10. I was told I had to get rid of my mohawk. Later, I found out it was not an issue with mohawks, but with the color of my skin. Minorities were allowed to have mohawks, but white people were not because it was considered cultural appropriation. Story 11. I firmly believe that Jordan Peterson, whom I otherwise consider irrational, was absolutely right in saying that men have trouble dealing with a woman who is acting irrationally because with men, there is the final possibility of physical violence if you step over the boundary in a way that does not exist with women. There are certain places you do not go with men because you know if that line gets crossed, you might get hit. You cannot do that with women, and because everyone knows you cannot, the social contract allows them to say things a man could never say to you. The threat of physical confrontation is a real thing that exists for most people who are not deeply involved online, And the way the internet acts like it is antisocial, totally out there behavior instead of something fairly common in the rest of the world puzzles me. Story 12. I am an educator. I have definitely felt the pressure to adhere to certain narratives or be reprimanded by administration. Some topics feel off limits because I am a man or because I am white, heterosexual, or cisgender. This creates an echo chamber where people congratulate each other for promoting inclusive conversations, while in reality, they silence and shun anyone who opposes them. Story 13. I have worked as a white-collar worker in several different industries. If you cannot say what you need to say to get the job done, you are in a toxic place. Story 14. Personally, it is disagreements with management that I cannot publicly say to their face. Some other people use cannot speak their minds to cover that they believe racial slurs are free speech and similar. I know what I mean by it. It is all based in context and nuance. Story 15. It's not my place to speak my mind. I lost my voice when I sold my share in the company, and frankly, I am happy just cleaning up the mess occasionally for a ridiculous fee. Work is not my kingdom. It is my income. I like to leave without making it my identity. Story 16. A company I used to work for did mandatory inclusion training and sexual harassment awareness training from human resources. We had exactly zero problems with that. Men and women worked together without issues. I was aware of at least 3 transgender people working within the company with no problems. It was insulting to be made to do the training. Felt like being told how to tie my shoelaces. The training included questions like, the boss invites Dave up to his hotel room. When he answers the door, his shirt is off, and Dave feels uncomfortable. Is this acceptable? It was very frustrating. Compulsory training for new hires is fine. Compulsory training if there has been a complaint is also fine. But making it mandatory for a group of employees who have already demonstrated no issues was unnecessary. Story 17. There is a bigger issue of logical fallacy at play here. It is not necessarily what was said. In reality, the message gets lost by those with political agendas who just want to criticize someone and arbitrarily slap on a label of misogynistic, homophobic, racist, and so on, and I am saying this as an Asian person. I will give you an example and you will see what I mean. I used to work for a small research organization that was awarded $100,000 of conditional scholarship funding. The reason was we ran research and then conducted teaching programs at high schools as a gateway to university. So we were in a good position to scout upcoming talent. The funder had some very basic and reasonable requirements. For example, the candidate had to have the equivalent of an 8 or 9 grade point average in order to be granted the funding. Here is where it goes wrong. The company I worked for insisted that the funding would only go to females of a particular Aboriginal ethnic tribe. This was a twofold problem since you were filtering by gender and race before looking at grades. I taught these classes, so I knew the students' grades. The girls, especially, those from this ethnic group, were always at the bottom of the class. Low-effort troublemakers, usually from drug-addicted backgrounds. Parents would show up intoxicated on school grounds and during meetings. The families were heavily entitled and would create major troubles if failing the student was considered. On the other hand, if you filtered by grades, those at the top of the class were usually of South or East Asian descent and usually male, as these were science subjects. Those students qualified for the grade requirements but were excluded by the company because of race and gender. This is absolutely horrifying. Anyone who dared to argue with higher management about this issue had their reputation entirely ruined. They were slandered with false accusations of being racist and misogynistic. But if you read the actual context, that is far from the case. The saddest part is that eventually, the external funders started asking fair questions about why the money was not being used and ultimately withdrew the funding, allocating it to another organization. This was devastating for the organization, but even worse for the hardworking top students who could have received fully funded bachelor's degrees. Story 18. When I worked in a county government department of health and human services, we really had to watch ourselves. If a customer was engaging in inappropriate behavior or using drugs in front of the building, do not say anything. Avoid discussing politics unless it was union approved. One person had a phishing picture in their cubicle and was required to remove all their pictures, while others had inappropriate pictures without issue. Meanwhile, other groups were allowed to act without consequence. I witnessed theft, drinking, and mean behavior that went unchecked. Story 19. When a speaker hired by the company to talk about energy futures spent 5 of her allotted 30 minutes discussing how all young men bear responsibility for allowing their group to vote for Donald Trump, I had some choice words I would have liked to share. However, it would have cost me my career since management held a similar view and had invited a speaker to give a 2-hour speech to the entire company on a similar topic earlier that year. Story 20. The new non-binary, latinx, radical feminist, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and other coworker was using being a fringe person to bully and force out the other heterosexual and cisgender employees who had been there for years. However, I was not allowed to call any of that out without being labeled a woman-hating Nazi. Story 21. So, a couple of things that might get me in trouble, and I would say these are workplace-specific and not universal. But here goes. Had a chief executive officer, to whom I reported, regularly issue a Happy Mother's Day all-company message urging people to disconnect over the weekend and celebrate the women in their lives. Lovely sentiment, no problem at all. Crickets for Father's Day. Never once. But you could imagine how a white man observing that would have received it. Felt strongly that we had a bias toward hiring women that was having a detrimental effect on the office culture. To a person, they were all decent humans whom I liked. But the interpersonal tensions between them got to a point after a couple of years that even women managers were urging me privately to hire more men onto the team just to restore a bit of balance. I never felt comfortable hiring on that basis, so I did not, but obviously it was never something I could observe out loud myself. I lean right of center in my politics. I also work in a Canadian city. Those things are not terribly compatible. So, in general, my opinions about certain current affairs would likely have been deemed at minimum distasteful. It is not worth the hassle at work. For example, I disagree with safe injection sites as a policy solution for addiction and would rather see addicts at a certain level forced into public care. I also think our immigration policies are worsening the homeless crisis and eroding a common sense of Canadian culture. These were very taboo things to say even just a few years ago. Story 22. Certain groups of people are insulated from genuine criticisms of their competence, while others have their achievements ignored because they are not the focus of attention. Mostly, Person X genuinely performs poorly at their job, but the human resources representative is a Subaru driver with a savior complex who thinks I carry a blood guilt. Story 23. First-generation American of Korean descent, mid-30s. What I cannot discuss in the workplace is reverse positive discrimination, also known as the model minority stereotype. Because of my ethnicity, I am unintentionally stereotyped as very smart and capable. As a result, I receive more work because others do not want it to be done incorrectly. Perfect competence is expected of me every time. When I make a mistake, since I am human, it is treated much more harshly than if someone else made the same error. Honestly, 9 times out of 10, this unfair treatment usually comes from clients or coworkers who are women. People of color in companies know that if they raise this issue, they are seen as the problem and accused of causing unnecessary trouble. In my case, it is often viewed as a compliment. Corporate political correctness today is essentially corporate white privilege rebranded, where people like me are told what we should be offended by, as determined by those who want to avoid discomfort or facing reality. Also, for younger Generation Z, they have made me their token Korean friend by default because they do not know many others. No, I do not know that TikTok dance challenge or the latest comeback song from your favorite new K-pop group of the month. I do not keep up with it despite your disappointment, because some of my all-time favorite artists became popular when you were in elementary school or much younger. I have not even begun to discuss the strange sexual harassment. I went from being invisible to non-Asian women to being fetishized because of Korean dramas. Story 24. I work in healthcare. Sometimes I just want to say, be quiet. It's not that bad. I can explain how it can be drastically worse. Stop wasting time. This is serious. You are throwing your time away. Stop agreeing to these plans and immediately ruining things. I can't really say that to the general public, but to other healthcare professionals who have worked in difficult conditions with frustrating patients, it comes up. To administration or office staff, Many of your codes and policies are actually pointless and exist only to make you look better for that promotion you are seeking. Maybe develop courage and actually advocate for your staff if you want better efficiency. Otherwise, we share jokes. Not from a place of hate, but just joking. We are all different, which means there are different things to poke fun at. But some people are sensitive and it is hard to know where the line is. There are boundaries I will not cross, by the way. Story 25. If your menstrual period does not interfere with your ability to work, then you do not need to mention it. However, if you have to bring it up because it is causing you to have a difficult day, then it is interfering. You cannot have it both ways. Story 26. It is frustrating when human resources is predominantly female, yet they lecture me about the importance of diversity. Diversity is often presented as a way to avoid accusations of racism or sexism by ensuring the right mix of characteristics, but it seems misguided. How can someone not feel uncomfortable during an interview knowing the other person receives a bonus for increasing certain demographic representation? Regardless of skin color or gender, this approach feels inappropriate. What group promoted this concept? There is rarely a focus on measurable contributions like an individual's ideas or value to the team. Instead, attention is placed on visible traits such as ethnicity and gender, which should not be the primary criteria for judgment. Story 27. This is a larger symptom of a mentality that, if you are not with us, you are against us that most social movements have. It is fairly effective at silencing ideas and creating echo chambers because questioning the group is risky. Take immigration. It is becoming a boiling point here in Canada because the government is not handling it sensibly. Progressives today are now willing to discuss points that conservatives have been bringing up for 15 years that had previously gotten them ostracized at work. Beyond that, swearing. Some people have an oversized reaction to hearing words like bitch and cunt. So when they hear phrases like bitch of a job or cunt of an engineer, they start accusing others of misogyny when women have nothing to do with what the technician is complaining about. Some people just want to say racist things, which is not acceptable. There is no defense for that behavior. Story 28. Men are afraid to speak their minds almost everywhere. At work and at home. Perhaps the only place they feel comfortable enough to do so is with friends. Story 29. Worked for a major Fortune 500 company during the COVID-19 pandemic. They made it clear that if you were not fully supportive of Black Lives Matter and the pharmaceutical industry, they would find a way to let you go. Story 30. Nothing that I do not already express at work. Also, I do not care about my workplace. I show up, work, get paid, and go home. I am not going to waste emotional energy at this place. I have realized at my company that no one really cares or wants to be responsible for anything, which is understandable. There is no consequence for doing the bare minimum and no reward for being the hardest worker. Story 31. They might feel that they will be punished socially or otherwise for any questioning or critique of unacceptable work if the people responsible for it are not white, male, or straight. Story 32. Anything that might offend or hurt feelings. It's not a level playing field. I'll give you examples. A woman I worked with had a crush on a man. He turned her down and dated someone else. One day she said to him, "Your forehead is so big, I can read your thoughts like they are on a flat screen." His reply was, "You have so much acne, I can read yours like it's Braille." He was suspended. She received a warning, and eventually he was allowed to return to work. Two men would have likely kept going or fought after work. I work in nursing now. Nurses can walk in saying men are worthless and keep talking about the decline of men. One man said something about marriage being slavery for men and ended up in human resources. It is much more likely women are going to get offended and report you. My best shift was with 3 of us men left on an island when the unit was being closed, with no secretary or support. Not even official lunches. It was bliss. We openly joked about the racist patient who demanded a charge nurse we did not have, so we sent in the white nurse and he accepted it. We had no fear of jokes getting too personal or someone getting hurt feelings. Story 33. I work in assisted living homes caring for residents who are incapable of caring for themselves due to cognitive or physical disabilities. This is the entire reason my employer exists. Additionally, The vast majority of our residents are older adults, come from English-only speaking households, and generally are with us because their parents have died or are unable to care for them anymore. Yet our upper management refuses to offer competitive pay and so are generally only able to attract work visa holders and new immigrants who can barely understand, read, or speak English. These people are then placed in positions of responsibility for caring for those residents. Do you see the issue? Medications are not given correctly, sometimes not at all. Communication between caretakers and residents and caretakers and doctors is non-existent in many homes and severely hampered in most of the rest. But anytime anyone hints at this, they are let go shortly thereafter. In my case, the reason I cannot speak my mind is not just because I am a man, though it does not help since 95% of the employees in management are female. From conversations I have heard, many hold negative opinions against all men simply because they are men. No, my biggest reason for not speaking is racism. 90% or more of all positions, including administrative positions, are held by black people who openly make racist comments without fear of punishment. They speak negatively about all non-black employees, Asian, Hispanic, and white, and work against them and other black employees when one is hired who is too light-skinned or acts in a way they consider too white. I, along with other employees, have reported these issues through the company's reporting system and have done so for a while now. Nothing has changed, and some of us were fired. While the communications were supposedly anonymous, employees are not supposed to use the company email account. A couple did, and it is assumed they were identified that way. Also, software was used to compare the anonymous emails against all internal emails to identify others by writing style or other means. It is no coincidence that the only ones who were not let go are those who anticipated these issues and employed countermeasures to protect themselves. I intentionally punctuated my emails differently, spoke in a manner completely unlike myself, used short, simple words, and ran every other email through an AI language tool to alter the content further. Others who were not let go took similar precautions or had their spouses or children write emails for them in their manner of speaking. Story 34. I worked at a bank. They claim to be transparent and have won many outstanding workplace awards. They force employees to give all 5-star ratings and other high marks. The manager was required to enforce this, and I had to do the same. I always fought for my team. When I brought in an internal candidate, I noticed significant discrepancies in pay. It was shocking to me that almost all females made approximately 30% more than their counterparts. I believe this happened because they hired females for about 80% of the senior and executive leadership positions. I had no problem with this until I saw them overriding my decisions on new hires for specific females whom I did not think interviewed well. Then I saw it firsthand when they fired me for standing up for the pay of a team member. They were treating him unfairly, and because I didn't play along, they fired me. Worst of all, I couldn't make them aware of this because to receive my severance and support myself for a few months, I had to sign a non-disclosure agreement that prevented me from speaking negatively about them. The bank blatantly lies about its ethics and sustainability to attract customers. At one point, they raised 1-year certificate of deposit rates and then lowered them again, hoping customers wouldn't leave, but many did. Now, top senior management are hiring friends who are unqualified. For many roles, top talent, including executives and senior leaders, have either been let go or are leaving in large numbers for other banks that are more honest about compensation and more transparent with pay scale information, which this bank refuses to share even with senior staff. Be careful when banking with what was once a smaller regional bank that grew rapidly by billions in a few years. These are the places that charge fees for everything, are impossible to reach by phone, and treat employees and customers as just numbers. Even if you have had no marks against you in a decade of managing effectively and maintaining strong relationships with customers and collaborators. Also, keep in mind the at-will employment policy, which means no reason is needed to terminate employment. Story 35. Stop bringing your dog to the restaurant. Stop bringing your dog to the grocery store. Stop taking your dog off leash to the non-dog park public park. Do you have a service dog? Is that a service dog? What service does the dog perform for you? Your comfort dog does not make it a service dog. Affirmative action can disadvantage more qualified candidates. The problem arises when race, gender, or other identity traits are prioritized over merit. Someone objectively more qualified may lose out. This conflicts with diversity, equity, and inclusion frameworks. There was a recent lawsuit where a person was fired due to new diversity, equity, and inclusion policies that conflicted with civil rights. The solution is to have truly blind additions based solely on merit. People resist this because it cannot repair past injustices or ensure equity of outcome rather than equity of opportunity, even if such repair contributes to the problem. Equality of opportunity does not guarantee equality of outcome. Even if everyone starts at the same point, natural differences in intelligence, work ethic, luck, and choices cause results to vary. This view triggers people because it is seen as undermining calls for systemic equity. Story 36. Does anyone remember the slut walk? Apparently, it started when a Toronto police officer was talking to a class. And one thing he said was that to keep yourself safe, you should keep in mind where you are and how you dress. The reaction was staggering. There were 3 years of street protests of women saying that they should be able to walk naked through a club and feel perfectly safe. This kind of reaction is difficult to deal with. I also cannot talk about wage differences anymore. Most studies have shown that if you compare by job title, the difference is around 2%, which is less than the margin of error. The big difference is actually in the number of men versus women in higher paying jobs, not how much they are paid. I have been told I should be ashamed, that the difference should be 0%, and asked if I would want my daughters paid less than a man. This was by someone with a bachelor's degree in mathematics. So I will not discuss it anymore. Story 37. I often do get in trouble. The girl walking around the office with her skirt so high you can see her slit is doing it because she is gratified by the attention and likes the thought of the boys masturbating to her later. But no, you can't say anything about it to anyone, because the standard line is she dresses only for herself and guys should behave themselves no matter what. You can't even look, even if she literally bends over backwards to get you to. Also, the black, indigenous, and people of color person in the office actually does get way more leeway and can act like a victim even when they are the aggressor because anyone who doesn't submit just doesn't recognize their privilege. You have to pretend the empress is wearing no clothes when they hold a meeting to better diversify the office, which means hiring more women and people of color, even though the office is already 70% women. Basically, you have to accept the default narrative that the white men need to be the listeners when that narrative is completely different from how the office conflicts are really playing out. Story 38. I personally do not have this problem, but I think it would be very easy for someone to take a complaint such as, this person lacks qualifications, work ethic, or professionalism, and twist it into something it is not by implying the criticism is based on bigotry. I have certainly worked in organizations that go beyond what most people would consider reasonable accommodations to avoid any allegations of discrimination. Like most systems of protection, the vast majority of people for whom it is designed use it appropriately, but there are always a few who abuse the system and become the argument against the system as a whole. For example, a small percentage of welfare abusers create the widespread myth of the welfare queen. Story 39. If management wants me to put in more effort, they need to pay me a fair salary. Right now, my only incentive is not getting fired, and even if they did fire me, it would just give me more time to find a better job. Story 40. My experience is that you cannot speak your mind about anything the higher-ups have decided upon that is either unwise or counterproductive. For example, if they decide to completely overhaul the user interface of an application, you cannot say that the new user interface is terrible, that your customers will dislike it, or that it is slow and buggy. Expressing anything other than enthusiastic support is seen as harming morale or creating a negative environment. Story 41. A long time ago, I was working retail at Target. We could not use the word gun, so you could not call a price gun a price gun. It was more irritating than anything. Story 42. I work for an asset manager. Shortly after starting, I was talking about artificial intelligence with a coworker and said, artificial intelligence tends to be biased when it comes to face tracking. Mind you, this was 2 years ago. I got a meeting to discuss how I need to watch my language at work. I don't speak much at work anymore, and now people wonder why I am quiet. Story 43. Women do not want to work in construction, so they are not looking for excuses to get you out of their way. Story 44. While white people are the majority race in America and have shaped its past, For some reason, other races are allowed to have groups for themselves. I have seen this with diversity, equity, and inclusion programs at multiple companies. They have a Black network, an Asian network, a Latino network, LGBTQ network, and so on in Microsoft Teams. It is not uncommon for these groups to show preference for their own races at work, especially outside of work. It is truly surprising. If white people do this, it is considered racist or linked to terrorism. If anyone makes a comment that can be seen as racist or sexist in the office these days, especially a white male, every other group of gender and race is against them. Human Resources is so concerned about lawsuits that white men are called into the office long before others making offensive comments about men or white people. While I have historically defended minorities, once feminism became prominent, it seems like America is being handed over to everyone else because of the melting pot idea and the country's past atrocities. However, the country has only been a melting pot when free or cheap labor was needed, or because the land was conquered and Native Americans had no choice but to assimilate or face execution. Our atrocities are minor compared to those of most other countries. What other country has a culture where men allow men from other cultures to take over? Why would anyone do that out of kindness or human compassion when other races in their own countries would likely not do the same if they took over ours? That is not rational thinking for men. It is emotional thinking more typical of women. The worst part is that we cannot have a real discussion about this issue without endless whataboutism, victimhood, or the right and extremists hijacking the argument for their own purposes. Story 45. I work in technology, and it is almost impossible to speak in defense of Palestine or express left-wing views without the risk of being blacklisted by someone higher up than you. I honestly cannot count how many chief executive officers I have seen on LinkedIn openly say things that would fit right into an Ayn Rand book or a Ku Klux Klan rally. Story 46. You cannot say anything that could be considered conservative. You cannot talk about news or current events. Story 47. You sound like an engineer or architect. That explains why you seem so perfect. From the viewpoint of others, there are now serious consequences for violating the new rules governing what can be said. Nice dress, Denise. Reported to Human Resources as harassment because Denise is upset. No, I'm not comfortable conforming with the new gender policies. Written up by Human Resources. No, you can't take the day off for insert reason. Accused of discrimination. You need to have those reports done by Friday, Todd. Called in by Human Resources for creating a toxic work environment because apparently that's bullying. I could go on, but that's what some fear. For the record, I am also a white-collar executive in the construction industry, but I started over 30 years ago with a shovel in my hand. I have seen bullying, harassment, and actual toxic work environments. Literally. I've had about enough of this modern office dynamic. I am a man, not a dog who needs to be muzzled. You asked. Story 48. I think that Muffin is getting a bad reputation from people who have never raised a child. Other than that, my opinions are well received because I am not out here saying, women should not be in leadership, or whatever it is that those individuals are afraid to say. Story 49. This work is unacceptable. Why did you do that? Yes, it is reasonable to ask you to come into the office 2 days a week. Why are you wearing gym shorts? What are those tattoos? It looks like you let a child with special needs draw on your calves. Story 50. I have only worked at one place like that as a supervisor. It was full of blatant nepotism and open favoritism. If you did not agree and comply unquestioningly with the leadership, they made your life very difficult. When I challenged the leadership once, I was assigned the worst shifts, which included 2 back-to-back 16-hour days followed by 3 days of showing up for 3 hours for the closing shift. I left that company weeks after that happened. Story 51. I am a front-end software developer. There have been multiple times I have wanted to reach through my screen and ask the back-end developer to look at the design to understand what fields are needed. Story 52. I feel fortunate that I am not one of those who blames diversity, equity, and inclusion or political correctness for reasons why I feel I cannot speak my mind. My concern comes down to what I actually think about having to be at work for 8 hours per day, even when I have finished my work and my coworkers' work, and there are still 3 hours left on the clock with no additional tasks expected to be done. Just adjust my hours to 8 and let me go home. Before someone says, Why should they pay you for 8 hours if you only worked 5? You would not bat an eye if it had taken a full 8 hours to do all that work. Just be glad I am not demanding a raise for being quick or efficient. Not that I could, since company policy only allows raises once per year during the annual review and caps them at 4%. So, I express my displeasure by no longer bothering to hide my sketchbook or browsing. Yes, the supervisor has noticed me sketching and otherwise slacking, but if there is nothing in the inbox, there is not much they can do. No, it has not come up during a review, so I take it as tacit approval. We will allow it, just do not let it become an issue. Story 53. I think there are problems with timing, setting, tact, and audience. You have to pick your battles, know where to fight them, how to fight them, and who you fight with or against. Most people just react impulsively in the middle of a meeting, in front of the wrong people, or worse, complain ineffectively over a long period until everyone is tired of it. As the great Kenny Rogers said, you gotta know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away, and know when to run. I have been fortunate to choose companies where I never had to run, but I have definitely held them, folded them, and walked away. Story 54. I find we are more forgiving of women and promote them faster just because they are female. One woman I know got ahead because it was all white men, and she was the only young Asian woman in the group. She was not good at her job. Story 55. Information technology professional here. Usually, it is not about being unable to be honest regarding bad ideas or incompetent coworkers. Sometimes you just want to call a stupid idea stupid. Story 56. Mid-40s as well. This is a big part of why I got back into trades. I can say what I want and I can be myself. I tried electromechanical assembly for 5 years and liked the work. It was challenging and far less physical, but there was a definite office culture that became quite tiresome after a while. The things that are said on a daily basis where I work now are not for the thin-skinned. It is much more fun that way. Story 57. I'm a senior engineer and handling some middle management responsibilities. The number of times I'm in meetings where everyone talks about needing to make a plan without actually planning anything makes me want to pull my hair out sometimes. Not to mention all the useless human resources trainings. I don't think anyone needs to worry about the work from home. Engineer behaving inappropriately or taking bribes in my role, which is not client-facing. And don't even get me started on the fact that it's all common sense that we don't need to be taught anyway. But if I call it out as a waste of my time in either context, I will get into trouble. Story 58. I have 3 layers of management above me. 2 of these layers are far above where they should be if they had earned their positions through talent and hard work. As a result, they are very sensitive to any criticism. Therefore, speaking truth to power is a career-ending action. Story 59. Sometimes it is not about saying offensive things. It is about expressing unpopular truths, like calling out inefficiency, pointing out a bad manager, or questioning a process that we have always done this way. It is less about diversity, equity, and inclusion and more about fear of rocking the boat in a sea of passive aggressiveness. Story 60. For instance, I work in the engineering instructor field. Calling things by their actual names is becoming an issue, such as slave cylinder, master cylinder, and slave lead. That situation feels like I am 1 inch away from a complaint being filed and the job lost. I am not sure if it is an irrational fear, but the young people are really sensitive and like to file complaints. Story 61. Being able to get a larger referral bonus if I refer a minority or female and they get hired does not hurt me directly, but it still gives certain races and genders preferential treatment over others. What affects me directly is when my company pushed to get minorities and women into technology and leadership positions in technology. If I wanted to apply for a promotion or other position, that meant an automatic disadvantage before anyone even read my qualifications. What makes it even more ridiculous is that, despite the fact that I appear to be the stereotypical white male and look Scandinavian or German, I am actually half Puerto Rican, as one of my parents was born there. Although I technically check the box, someone like me would not give off the diverse look that a company might be seeking. Story 62. As a tradesman, I have trade speak, standard language, and normal conversation. I switch based on who I am talking to. Story 63. I have experienced a reverse diversity, equity, and inclusion situation where the men are perceived as old school, old white men. It seems they receive more leniency and second chances than the women. When I give critical feedback to one of the women, I keep it between us. However, with a man, I may express my concerns openly during a team meeting. It's not that I believe the women cannot handle the feedback or respond to it. Rather, supervisors appear to take any criticism of a female employee more seriously, and it seems to affect them for a longer time. Story 64. I work in construction. Today, a guy from another crew was walked off the site and will never return because he jokingly yelled out a certain three-letter slur that starts with F. The problem was, the fire alarm speakers were being tested at that very moment, and his joke was broadcast to everyone on site. I find it funny, and most of us here do, but one person made a big issue over it, and now that guy is out of a job. His own fault? Yes. I don't personally think it is a fireable offense. But this is a modern example of fear. Tomorrow we will all be taking sensitivity training, but I can guarantee the training will not be effective. The real takeaway that people will get from this is to watch what you say around this one particular person because they may try to get you fired. Story 65. I am a federal employee. I am very careful with my words. I have never shared my personal beliefs at work because I maintain a strict separation between my professional and personal life. This seems even more important nowadays. I am astonished at some of the things my coworkers not only say but also send in emails and type into Microsoft Teams chats. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.